And this creates a sense of insecurity and disconnection. And again, if you think about a relationship in your own life, maybe you haven't even met the person, maybe it's with like an online troll or something. Chances are you feel like they don't practice integrity towards you. They violate their integrity towards you. Chances are you feel like they perceive you as somehow less worthy of being treated with respect. And chances are you feel disconnected from them and insecure with them. So the beautiful thing about this formula is that we can come back to that. We come back to it at any moment in time. We can pause and ask ourselves, we're in a difficult interaction. Am I practicing the formula? Or do I feel like this other individual is practicing the formula toward myself? One of the great things about building relational literacy is not just that we can be kinder people and, more effective in our communications, but we can also protect ourselves from relational harm. Because so often we end up being accepting unfair treatment or unhealthy treatment because we can't quite put our finger on what's wrong. You just kind of come out of an interaction, or you have a relationship with a colleague and you just feel kind of lousy, but you don't know exactly what it is that's going wrong. When you're more relationally literate, you can put your finger on it and you can say, oh, that person's not practicing the formula toward me. They're using this such and such a technique when they're interacting with me or whatever. So that's the formula that underlies, relational literacy.
Can you give me an example of how you would actually put that in place with somebody who perhaps is disrespecting you, or like you're in an interaction, if we go back to the vegan versus non-vegan and it has devolved into something acrimonious, how do you take that formula and put it into effect?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you would put it into practice, and it really depends on the situation. Preventing others from disrespecting you is practicing the formula, right? Mm-hmm. Because allowing people to treat you badly is allowing them to violate their integrity. It's also violating your harming your dignity. So it really depends on the situation. But when you speak your truth honestly and with compassion, and you say, for example, you're having an argument with a non-vegan, right? And this person is telling you, let me think of a common example. Oh, you're sitting at the dinner table and there's a carcass in the center of the table. And you say, I would really appreciate it if we could put this in the other room. And because I don't want to look at it. And the person says something to you like, oh my God, here you go again. You're just so overly sensitive and like expecting us to accommodate your every need, whatever. You can say, and by the way, I would recommend having one ally at that dinner table with you before you even start the dinner, but that's another story. So you could say something like, you speak your truth, like you tell your truth as your experience and your story, not this is what you should do. This is what you think, this is how you should change. Nobody can make your story wrong. And you can share very openly if it's a safe situation for you to be open in. Listen, I understand why it seems like I'm having an overreaction to you. I understand why it seems that way. Let me just share what I see, In the past, this was not a problem for me. I used to be able to look at the turkey and feel appetized like you do. It's just that I have seen so many horrible videos and images of, what happens to the animals that become our food, that when I look at the turkey on the table, no matter how hard I try, I cannot help but have these images of horrible images of these animals suffering. They just jump into my mind. And it's really so painful for me. I don't know how to describe it. Maybe it's the way that you would feel if it were the carcass of a dog on the table. This is just my experience. So it's really hard for me. And having it in the other room, I would really appreciate it, right? Sometimes that'll work, sometimes it won't. But what I'm demonstrating is that you're not saying this is how you should be. What you're saying is this is what my experience is. And this is what I would really appreciate.
Okay, great. Thank you. You may have saved some Thanksgiving dinners from going south with those tools. So, You say that the same mentality that causes us to relate to people in a dysfunctional way that leads to harm and disconnection causes us to relate to animals in a dysfunctional way. And also that this mentality is contagious. Can you explain these points?
Yeah. So carnism it's an ism. It's and it's a bad ism. It's a non-relational system. Carnism is essentially a system of oppression. It is structured in the same way. And this is what one of the focuses of my doctoral dissertation was, like, looking at the structure, identifying the system and then deconstructing it, looking at the structure of it. Carnism is structured in the same way that other problematic or oppressive systems are, like patriarchy or classism, racism, speciesism, and so on. And all of these systems stem from the very same mentality. I call this the non-relational mentality. The non-relational mentality is a way of thinking that drives, the way that we think tends to drive the way that we feel and the way that we behave. The non-relational mentality is a way of thinking that drives us to act against the formula, essentially, to violate integrity and harm dignity, and it leads to insecurity and disconnection. And when it comes to these systems, it also leads to unjust power imbalances, or it feeds unjust power imbalances. So this mentality is, the core of this mentality is a belief. And this is what I call the belief in a hierarchy of moral worth. And I'll unpack this. This is the belief that some individuals are more worthy of moral consideration, being treated with respect, essentially, than others. If you look at all injustices, all unjust systems, whether it's these massive social systems that we were just talking about, or smaller systems. Systems are basically, it's another word for relationships, right? A system could be a relationship of two people, or it could be multiple relationships, like a social system or a workplace, or a group. So this belief in a hierarchy of moral worth, that some individuals are more worthy of being treated with respect than others, it lies at the heart of all systems that are organized around injustice, right? Whether that's an abusive interpersonal relationship, or a dysfunctional toxic workplace, or a broader social system. There's this belief that I, or we, my group, has the right to treat you as less than. I see you and treat you as less worthy of being treated with respect than I am, or than my group is. So we can just, the content of these systems changes. The content is the what, who is oppressing or abusing whom changes. Men and women, people of other genders, for example, humans and animals, for example, the content changes, but the process, how we think about the others and ourselves, it remains consistent. It's not enough to only look at who is oppressing or abusing whom. When we look at big social problems, we have to ask how and why we oppress or abuse in the first place. Otherwise, we're just going to keep trading one form of oppression for another. You can see people who are like really active in social justice, for instance, and yet animals never factor into the equation. And yet the very same mentality that causes us to cause such horrific harm to the animals is causing us to cause a horrific harm to humans. And then you see a lot of people who are, they'd give their lives for animals, and yet they're throwing humans under the bus in the process, or somebody who seems to have it all together because they're working for a better world for animals, humans, and the environment, and yet they're treating their friends and family badly. It's the same mentality, is the non-relational mentality that causes us to feel somehow morally superior to others, that we have a right to treat someone else, in a way that harms their dignity, whether that someone else is the pig in a slaughterhouse, or that someone else is, a person in our close inner circle, or somebody online who we disagree with politically. This is the problem. It's this way of thinking and relating. And so when this is one of the reasons it's so important, in my opinion, to understand the formula, recognize the formula, and build relational literacy. Because when we build relational literacy, we help to transform all of these problems. And we're more effective in working to transform these problems many of us, myself included, we're working in, what are called counter systems. These are systems like veganism, right? Feminism. They were organized to challenge oppression. And yet we can see these are our groups and our movements that are structured to try to end a particular form of injustice or of oppression. And within these groups and these movements, we're kind of cannibalizing ourselves because we're acting out the same kind of non-relational mentality toward others. Like, oh, should you say plant-based or should you say vegan? Wait a minute. I saw you put milk in your coffee this morning. You can't call yourself a vegan. I mean, the infighting, that you see in so many different groups and movements is like, it's astounding. The levels of infighting, they're very, very high, which is not surprising because people are people. And most of us have learned that when we have a difference of opinion from somebody else, we need to kind of push them and fight with them in order to get them to agree with us. So learning the formula, however, and building relational literacy will help all of us who are working to create a better world for everyone do so much more effectively. We actually have a new project that we're going to be launching in a few weeks. People can visit infighting.org if they want to learn how to end infighting, about how to end infighting.
Yeah, that's actually very helpful. I have been a part of some vegan communities, and it's astounding the amount of sabotage in between people for various reasons, and that infighting can really be disruptive to the ultimate goal. So when you talk about vegan supporters, what is a vegan supporter and why is this subject important?
Yeah, vegan supporter is somebody who supports veganism and vegans, right? Even though they're not vegan themselves or not fully vegan themselves. So we tend to assume, those of us who are vegan, tend to assume either you're vegan and you're part of the solution, or you're not vegan and you're part of the problem. And, the problem with this way of thinking, I mean, there are problems with this way of thinking, but the big problem with this way of thinking is that it prevents like 99% of the population from supporting a cause that needs all the help it can get. Mm-hmm. There are many people who, actually believe in the tenets of veganism. And, this is even in recent years as veganism has gained in popularity. Like, when I first became vegan, people were like, they looked at me like I had two heads, like, what's wrong with you? And now it's like, oh, I wish I could do that. Oh, that's why you look so young. I wish I could do that. Good for you. I could never do that, but good for you. And it's like, people get it, they support it by and large. And, if we say, but you're not vegan, so forget it. We really push away support that we need. We need all the support we can get. And some of the people who have done, in my experience, the most for the cause are not vegan. They're not even vegetarian. They are people I've given like talks or trainings about this issue all over the world. I've been in over 50 countries and 6 continents, and generally get pretty good international press when I'm traveling. And consistently, I have like big media that I'm talking to, and the people interviewing me frequently say, oh, I'm so glad I got to interview you. I know this is such a terrible problem, and I love the fact that I can do my part by raising awareness. And I'm like, you're reaching hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, this is like just on a purely practical level, on the level of impact. This does more good for the cause, than somebody simply not eating animals for their entire life, especially if that person who's not eating animals is communicating in a way that's counterproductive and might even be turning people off to the cause. So really, we need to be inviting in supporters, saying like, you're great, you're a doctor and you're not vegan, but you're supportive of plant-based nutrition. That's fantastic, or a dietitian. Invite people in to use their influence in whatever way they can to support the cause.
Okay, excellent. So, so in some of your work, you touch on secondary traumatic stress. How does it impact vegans and their relationships?
So I touched on this a little bit earlier, where I talked about how many people, whether sort of somebody who identifies as vegan or as following a plant-based lifestyle, we get the same feeds. Like a lot of the time, we're sort of like plugged into the same social media or similar social media channels, and we often end up seeing the trauma, like witnessing graphic animal suffering, basically. And this can be traumatizing. So secondary traumatic stress is a post-traumatic stress response. It's actually exactly like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, with one key difference, which is that it affects the witnesses to violence rather than the direct victims of violence. And so many people who are vegan have suffered from some sort of traumatization, and some substantially. You do not have to be somebody who's going undercover to have been traumatized from what you've been witnessing. It's a normal human response to witnessing this kind of trauma. I mean, carnism is a global atrocity, as I said. It's by definition, it's a mass traumatic event. What happens, however, is that when we're traumatized and we don't know it and we don't know how to take care of ourselves, we can end up developing a whole host of problems. And I have seen this all over the world that I've gone, where we, for example, we can start becoming misanthropic, which is having a dislike for humankind. We can start feeling profound despair. We can start feeling guilty for feeling good. We can start feeling like, our efforts are never enough. And they are never enough to bring about animal liberation, obviously, but that's not what I'm talking about. At the end of the day, it's never enough. And people get into compulsive overworking, which then can lead to burnout. And we can develop, we become dysregulated more easily. Dysregulation, or what's called emotional dysregulation, it's being emotionally out of balance. It's generally when your emotions there's a charge around your emotions and you struggle to manage them. You can have chronic dysregulation. Everybody knows what dysregulation is because we get dysregulated all the time. Something bad happens, like, oh my God, you feel dysregulated. Your heart's racing. You could be angry. You could be in grief. So when we have secondary traumatic stress, we can become chronically dysregulated, and that's a problem for a lot of reasons. Not the least of which is that dysregulation, is contagious. Non-relational behaviors are contagious, essentially. And when we're dysregulated, we're more likely to dysregulate others. So, for example, somebody who's like really charged up, short fuse, kind of intense, anger underneath the surface, anger coming up, you interact with them. It doesn't take long for you to start feeling a little dysregulated yourself and saying things that then dysregulate others. So we have to be, it's important to be mindful of secondary traumatic stress. And one piece of this that's particularly important to be mindful of is that when we're traumatized, we can start to develop a worldview. I call this the trauma narrative. It's a way of thinking, a way of seeing, essentially, a way of thinking, whereby we start to put everybody, including ourselves, into one of three categories. You're either a victim, and if you're not a victim, you're a perpetrator. And if you're not a perpetrator or a victim, you're a hero. A lot of people will say, oh, you're a witness, but a witness can actually be a witness perpetrator if they don't help, or a witness hero if they do. So it's victim, perpetrator, and hero. So what happens is we start to place everyone in one of these roles when we get traumatized enough. So it's like, you're good, you're bad. You're not an animal hanging in a slaughterhouse. And, when we have these sort of rigid categories, we become perfectionistic around them. We don't see any wiggle room. Like, the reality is that we all play all roles, right? So you're a vegan and maybe you're playing the hero role because you're helping to end the atrocity, but you're also victimized by carnism because you live in a world that daily affronts, your deepest sensibilities, and you're probably mocked and ridiculed and dealing with secondary trauma, and you're also a perpetrator because we all are, we're all participating in the problem in one way or another. It's impossible not to. It's impossible to live perfectly in alignment with our ideals in such a messy, complicated, messed up world. Your vegan shoes have horse glue in the heels of them or something. I mean, who knows? But what the problem is, when we put everyone, including ourselves, into one of these categories, we start to hold everyone, including ourselves, to impossible standards. One slip up, I was traveling and I ate something with cheese that had casein in it, vegan cheese that had casein in it. whatever. And all of a sudden, if you're not a hero, because heroes are all good all the time, then you're a perpetrator. And you can see this in, with vegans talking about other vegans, asking if so-and-so is a real vegan and calling people out for, what they are or aren't doing enough. So we have to be really careful because this mentality, it fuels infighting. It makes it very hard for us to advocate effectively about veganism to non-vegans because we come across in a way that's, not terribly attractive, and it hurts us. And so, the key is awareness. I have in Beyond Beliefs, I have a lot of information about this. We have, I'll give you some resources at the end of this session, but the key is really building awareness and learning about this issue. And there are 3 things that you can do. Everybody can do right now if you want to prevent further secondary traumatic stress and manage what you have now and help heal it. One is to not overwitness. Stop looking at the graphic pictures. Stop. They come through your feed, turn it off. You don't need to take it all in. There's a strange, compulsive, quasi-addictive flavor to this horrible imagery where people start to feel like they can't look away. And if we had another couple of hours, I'd talk about that, but we don't, so I won't. Just know that happens. Stop taking it in. Every time you take in more of this, you're feeding your trauma. And you don't need to be traumatized to be a part of the solution. In fact, the more traumatized you are, the less able you are to be an effective part of the solution. Give yourself permission to let the trauma go and to stop witnessing. That's one thing. Do not make others unintentional witnesses. Don't shock people with horrific imagery, because that is a form of emotional violence that can traumatize people, and they will immediately perceive you as a perpetrator because you shocked them and it hurt them. And they're going to direct their anger at you rather than where it actually should be directed, which is at the system. That's the problem, animal agribusiness. We need to be able to raise awareness. There's no question. We need to be able to show this information. There's no question. But how we do that determines how successful we are. And getting somebody's consent, there are lots of ways to do this, is practicing the formula and reducing the chances of a backlash. And the third thing to do is to practice really, really healthy, good self-care. Do what you need to practice the formula toward yourself. And as part of your self-care, foster healthy relationships. People who have strong relational connections are less likely to be traumatized and more likely to heal from the trauma that they have experienced.
Okay, excellent advice. So, what are some of the key tips that you can share about effective communication beyond what you just said?
Well, I'll give one tip actually for effective communication. So it's most of it. So all communication is made up of 2 components: the content, which is what we're talking about, right? And the process, which is how we're communicating. Most of us over-focus on the content and under-focus on the process. We just want to get the words perfectly right. We want to get our facts perfectly straight. However, studies have shown the process matters more, much more, in fact. So, for example, if you think about a conversation you had maybe at a dinner party or something, I don't know, like 6 months ago or a year ago or 5 years ago, there's a good chance that you don't remember any of the content. You don't even remember what you were talking about, but you probably still remember how you felt in the conversation. The process determines how you feel. So when your process is healthy, you can talk about anything without arguing. And when your process is not healthy, you can't talk about anything without arguing. A healthy process is based on the formula, not surprisingly. In a healthy process, our goal is not to win, which means to make the other person lose. And it's not to be right, which means to make the other person wrong. Our goal is mutual understanding. The only reason we use communication in the first place is because we're not mind readers. That's it. The goal of communication, the objective of communication is for the other person to understand what you're thinking and feeling, and for you to understand what the other person's thinking and feeling and maybe needing. So when it doesn't mean that, you can't talk beyond that, like you can't have something that you want to, an outcome that you hope for the conversation. But the very first, most important step has to be mutual understanding. So I'm sharing my truth with you. I'm not telling you what's true for you. I'm not telling you what you should be doing. Here's what's true for me. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm feeling. Maybe this is what I need. And I want to listen to yours as well, as long as you communicate in a way that's respectful. So this one tip is to be more process focused. And if you're more process focused, everything else will become a lot easier in your communication. There are many, many, many like very specific tools that you can use as well. The debate model is usually not effective. There are certain situations where the debate model makes sense, in political, when people are running for office, for instance, or in a courtroom. Apart from very few exceptions, the debate model is usually counterproductive. So if you notice that you're starting to debate somebody, that you're starting to kind of push your truth on them, rather than sharing the truth of your experience, you're trying to make them lose and convince them of the rightness of your position. That's a red flag that you're probably not communicating in a way that's as effective as you could be. And when you invite somebody into a debate with you, you're basically inviting them to come up with all the reasons as to why their position is wrong or right. And in the end of the conversation, they can end up, and studies have shown this, they can end up even more convinced of their position. So discuss rather than debate, have a healthy process.
Okay, excellent. So your book Beyond Beliefs has appendices that are scripts readers can use to talk about veganism and their needs with non-vegans. Why did you include these?
It can be really hard to start to try to have these conversations, where you're asking somebody to be a vegan supporter, or sometimes I say a vegan ally. Or where you're saying, this is what the world looks like through my eyes. And one of the appendices is like a letter to a non-vegan in your life. You can just photocopy them and change up the words however you want and use them. But they're a starting point, because these conversations can be quite difficult and challenging to have. We also, after the book was published, my organization Beyond Carnism, we published a video. We produced a video called What to Say to Vegans. And this is a 7-minute video. It's on our website, carnism.org, right on the homepage, What to Say to Vegans. And this is a 7-minute video that is basically what the world looks like through vegan eyes, to invite non-vegans into your world. And, a lot of vegans find very, very often vegans struggle in their relationships, particularly their closer relationships, because they're trying so hard to get the people in their lives to become vegan. And it's like you go vegan, you become vegan, and all of a sudden there's this it gets so hard, and there's this defensiveness. And then it's like, oh my God, how can I respect you? Look at what you're doing. How can you be doing this? And it can be very painful, because vegans automatically start to feel disrespected from the people in their lives. And we all seek connection with others, healthy connections with others. So, and then vegans understandably think, well, the way to solve this problem of feeling so disconnected is just turn everybody around me vegan. Then we won't have the disconnection anymore. Except the harder you try to turn people around you vegan, usually the harder they push back and the greater the disconnection. And it becomes this feedback loop. And very often what vegans find is that they don't need the people in their lives to be vegan. They need them to be vegan supporters, or another way to say this is an ally. Everyone, particularly in the closer relationships, we all need to know that those with whom we're in relationship really understand and respect our inner world. Everybody needs to know this, whether it's about veganism or something else. And it's very painful for vegans, who very often end up feeling like, I can't share something that's so deeply within me, some of the things that give me the greatest joy and cause me the greatest sorrow. I can't share that with you. And not only can I not share that with you, but you're looking down on me, So, but what vegans can do is to say, instead of go vegan, I need you to become vegan, I'm going to give you all the reasons why you should be vegan, which, as I said, often doesn't work, is to simply say, listen, I would love to be able to share information about veganism with you, not to turn you vegan, but so you understand me. This is so fundamental to who and how I am in the world today. It's so important to me. And if you don't understand what this core belief that I carry around is based on, and how I see the world, you're never really going to understand me. And there's a really good chance that you're going to be doing things that are going to be deeply offensive to me without even intending to. And in this way, you share the information. And very, very often people find, and by the way, that's a very reasonable request and a very healthy request to make of somebody. Requesting that somebody change their diet is crossing a boundary, and many people get defensive. Don't tell, I'm a grown-up, don't tell me what to eat, but if you're in relationship with somebody, it is a completely rational and relationally healthy request to say, I need you to understand me. And in order for you to understand me, I need to share this with you. And whether it's veganism or anything else, Catholicism or whatever. So it's very often what vegans find is that when somebody gets it and they become a supporter and they say, look, I'm still not there yet. Maybe I'll never be there, but you know what? Good for you. I see your compassion. I honor your compassion. I support you. I'm grateful for what you're doing, whatever. I see you. And then they become much more sensitive about how they communicate with you. This transforms relationships.
Well, that actually leads us perfectly into my next question, which you did touch on a little bit, which is, what can people do if they want to improve their personal relationships and also help create a more relational world?
So that you're right. I mean, that does speak to your last question. And I would also come back to, committing to building relational literacy. And the thing about relational literacy is that you can build it, like every interaction you have is an opportunity to practice relational literacy and to build relational literacy, whether you're paying for your groceries, or filling your tank at the gas station, talking to somebody, or you're talking to your loved ones about veganism and, eating animals, or you're on a stage giving a talk. Like, these are all opportunities. And, it's not rocket science. It's not, building relational literacy is not rocket science, and it can be so transformational. And the more we do it, like, it doesn't matter what area of life you build relational literacy in, it will spill into other areas of your life. When you build relational literacy because you want to be a better partner, this will help you also be a healthier consumer in some ways.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to turn over to the audience for a Q&A for about 30 minutes. So how do you respond to people who argue that it's natural for humans to consume meat and it's, a part of our evolutionary history? How would you take that on, or how should you suggest that others take on that question?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, what I say often is I'll say, I know I used to believe that it was natural for people to eat meat as well. And it's actually true that, humans have been eating meat and, as a part of an omnivorous diet for, thousands of years now. There's no question about that. Humans have also been like raping other humans and murdering other humans for just as long. And, we have to be really careful not to conflate natural and justifiable. There are lots of other things that I could say to that, but, I say just have to be careful, when we look at, a lot of things that we would all agree, practices that we would all agree are practices we don't want to continue and perpetuate today. They were justified based on, the practice being natural. I mean, Nazis said this, people, be careful with that word, but you can look back toward any genocidal, ideology, and they probably used the argument that doing so is natural, that it was normal, natural, and necessary, actually. So I would just share, natural, how we define natural is, it's often changing, and generally it's defined, by, we decide what's natural based on our cultural norms. We look at science, which is where we get our definition of natural from. We tend to look at science through the lens of carnism, right? So we're looking at carnistic science, and it's natural because what? Because we've always been doing this. We haven't always been eating animals. Like our earliest ancestors were actually fruitarians. And then we evolved to be scavengers, So when we look at history and science through the lens of carnism, we only look as far back as we need to in order to justify our current carnistic practices. But I would just, I say, it's true that we've been doing this for a long time, whether that makes it natural or not, that's an interesting question. There are other things we've been doing for just as long that, we probably would agree that are not worth continuing today, that we don't want to continue today.
Well, excellent. Really great interview. Now I'm going to open it up for the audience for the Q&A. But before we do that, we'd like for everyone to know how to connect with you and find your number of books that you have.
Yeah, sure. You can visit carnism.org. That's my organization is Beyond Carnism. So you can visit carnism.org. And one of our main programs is we have a lot of videos and a lot of tools on that website. And one of our main programs is our Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy. And the Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy is you can get linked through carnism.org as well, or you can go to veganadvocacy.org. And we have a lot of courses on, how to communicate about the issue, for example, about veganism, what the science shows, what are evidence-based outreach communication strategies. We really see ourselves as a support organization. We are in support of people who are doing this incredibly important work of, raising awareness of the problems inherent in animal agriculture and working to change that. So we have lots and lots of free resources.